It began with a series of letters. It ended with an innocent man walking free after 29 years in a New York State prison. That man is David McCallum, a free man now for more than 3 years. He joins us with one of those letter writers, Ken Klonsky, who has chronicled the whole story in his book, Freeing David McCallum, The Last Miracle of Rubin Hurricane Carter. He's also Director of Media Relations for Innocence International. Ken, it's good to have you here for the first time. David, so wonderful to see you again.
Thank you very much.
You and I have sat around this table and others in the past, and we're going to get to your story, but I hate to do this off the top, but a lot of people still won't know your story, and I think I need you to take us back to those days more than 3 decades ago when you got scooped up by the cops and ended up going to jail for a very long time. What were the circumstances?
Sure. So the circumstances was that a 20-year-old white man in Queens by the name of Nathan Brenner was abducted in front of his home and apparently taken to Brooklyn, New York, where he was found in the back of a park with a gunshot wound in his head. This occurrence occurred on October 20th, 1985. But on October 27th, 1985, a friend of mine, Willie Stuckey, was arrested for that very crime and taken to the precinct with Mr. Stuckey falsely confessed to witnessing me shoot Mr. Brenner. And as a result, 3 hours later, I was arrested for the crime and taken down to the police station and interrogated about the crime. Once I was asked about the crime, did I know anything about someone being shot in the park a week before? When I answered no, the interrogating officer slapped me in my face. So he asked me again and threatened to hit me with a chair if I didn't tell him what he wanted to hear.
Which you did.
Which I did.
And then you ended up spending the next 29 years of your life in jail.
That is correct.
How did you first hear about his story?
David wrote to me because he had read an interview that I did with Rubin Hurricane Carter in the Sun magazine. It was highly unexpected that he would write to me. I had no experience either in wrongful convictions or with the law.
So why decide to get involved in this one?
It coincided with Rubin's leaving the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, and he had nobody, in effect, to continue his career of getting people out of prison. And so I was there because I'd done that interview with him, and I was the Sancho Panza following him into the wilderness. But he knew what he was doing.
Well, the hurricane, I mean, a lot of people in Toronto obviously know the hurricane because he spent a lot of time here. He was a great fighter back in the day. He died not too long ago, yes?
2014, right before David got out of prison.
How instrumental was his involvement in ultimately getting David freed?
He was the inspiration behind the effort because without him, I never would have been able to get a series of very fine professionals to help him, including Oscar Michelin, the lawyer, Steve Drizzen, who's a very well-known false confession expert in Northwestern, and Laura Cohen at Rutgers University. Rubin's name was, and still is in some ways, very important in wrongful convictions. He raised millions of dollars for wrongful convictions, units, you might call them, all over the country.
What was the kind of straw that broke the camel's back in David's case that ultimately led authorities to say, we've got an innocent man in jail, we got to let him go?
I think Rubin's letter, his dying wish was for David to get out of prison, and it was noticed by the district attorney, the new district attorney in Brooklyn, Ken Thompson. And Ken had come in on the proviso that he was going to get justice for people who'd been wrongly convicted in Brooklyn, which numbered over 100 people. And he decided to be good to his word. The reason he chose David was that he respected Rubin, I think, a lot, and he also felt like David's case should be put at the top. Otherwise, he would have maybe had to wait 50, 60 people, 50, 60 other investigations.
Can you follow up on that, David, and how well you knew Hurricane Carter or what the nature of your relationship was like with him?
Well, a friend of mine was reading this magazine while I was at a place called Eastern Correctional Facility. And so when I read the interview between Ken Klonsky and Rubin Hurricane Carter, I knew who Rubin was. I didn't know who Ken was at the time, obviously, but I knew who Rubin was. I knew that he was a former prize fighter. I knew that he had spent 19 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. So, knowing those things about Rubin, of course, I decided to write Ken Klonsky a letter, let them know, explaining to him who I was and what I was writing him for.
Did you have any expectation that they would take up your case?
Absolutely not. At that particular time, I had written hundreds of letters. I've been denied at every turn. So I took the position that I'm going to continue to what I call a letter writing campaign, and I was going to take it wherever it went. I was going to sort of brace myself for any sort of denials that come my way, but at the same time, I was going to remain optimistic that someone would come along and take my case in. Just so happens that when I wrote Ken Klonsky the letter, he wrote me back about a week and a half later, letting me know that he was touched by what I had to say in my letter and that he would see what he can do by getting the hurricane involved.
How'd you feel about that development?
I was very happy about that, but at the same time, because I was so beaten down by the system at that time, meaning that my state and federal appeals were exhausted, I didn't really have any other legal recourse other than post-conviction motions. So I was very pessimistic while optimistic at the same time. Yeah.
Is it essentially looking for a needle in a haystack, Ken, trying to get a wrongful conviction overturned?
It's not a needle in a haystack. It's more like major resistance. I was the other night mentioning to people at a law school in New York that if reasonable people had sat down with David's case and spent an hour or an hour and a half, we'd have all left the table and said, you know what, let him out. But it took 10 years because the people who are in power don't want people freed. It hurts everybody's reputation in the bureaucracy. So they put up resistance at every single place in the process. So it's not a needle in a haystack, it's right in front of you.
It's just a matter of trying to get all the vested interests to take the time.
And to admit that there's error, because wrongful convictions aren't the problem. There have to be wrongful convictions. There's no, it's a mathematical certainty. The problem is that everybody circles the wagons. That's where the difficulty lies. People don't like to admit error.
Let's find out about those people, David. There were police officers who wrongly arrested you. There were prosecuting attorneys who wrongly aimed to try to get you convicted. All of the people who were involved in that circling of the wagons, which ultimately resulted in you going to prison for a very long time, what has happened to any of them?
Well, the interrogating officer of my case at the time was police officer Joseph Buddha. He passed away in the early 1990s, and there were no repercussions or consequences for his actions, nor would they be at that particular time because my case was still going through the appeal process. In New York State, they have very strong immunity laws, so that means that prosecutors are strongly protected by laws, meaning that they couldn't be prosecuted, for the most part, for putting innocent men and women in prison.
Do you at least get an apology from the state?
Oh, no, I did not. No.
New York State did not officially apologize to you?
No, they did not.
Despite the fact that their justice system put you away for 29 years?
That's correct. They did not apologize.
How is that possible, Ken?
Well, they apologized with money. So in a way, it's a de facto apology.
It's an acknowledgement, but it's nobody saying we screwed up, we're sorry.
No, not the people who were involved. In fact, they all said, well, not all, but the prosecuting attorney said, well, who would become a judge now, because everybody gets promoted when you make an arrest like that, said this was highly unusual. This is not something I can accept that he's taken out of prison, but he knew basically that David was innocent even when he started to prosecute him.
At this point, all these years later, would an apology from any of the participants who put you there mean anything to you?
Well, yes, I think it would. So, because at the very least I would have been okay knowing that someone at least took some sort of responsibility for what had happened to not only me, but more importantly, what happened to Willie Stuckey, too, because it was Willie Stuckey, unfortunately, who lost his life while doing time for this particular crime. So, yes, I believe the apology would have been in order, and I would have accepted the apology because I think I was raised the right way by my parents. And given the horrific stuff that occurred to us, me and Willie Stuckey, I think I would have done that, yes.
Willie was your pal. How old was he when he died?
Willie was 32 years old when he passed away, yes.
TVO was a partner in the documentary that got made about your situation, and we've got, let's look a little snippet of that, and then we'll come back and chat, okay?
Sure.
Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
As his lawyer, I have to let him know what the options are that he has to getting out of jail. And I said, David, there may come a time where it's in your best interest to just wave the white flag.
I've thought about it, and I could not see myself sitting in front of anyone and admitting guilt in this crime. I can't do it, and I won't do it. And if it takes dying in prison, I would do that.
David, that is, of course, the awful Hobson's choice that you had in prison. Fess up that you did something you didn't do and they'll consider letting you out, or stick it out to the end knowing that you may spend the rest of your life in jail. Why so adamant that you weren't going to fess up? Because we simply didn't commit the crime. For a very long time, even from the time I was arrested and shortly thereafter, especially particularly after the confessions were made, we immediately recanted them. And we recanted them because we knew that we didn't commit a crime, because we also knew at the time they said that this crime was said to have been committed on October 20th, about 3:20 in the afternoon. Willie and I were both in our neighborhood parks playing, with my sisters, which we normally did on every other Sunday or any given Sunday. And plus, I just couldn't see myself ever killing someone, So I knew that we didn't commit the crime, and I was going to stand on that principle because, I'm not a killer, and I didn't want to be branded as one, although I was convicted as one, but that didn't mean I have to live as one. So, how close did you ever get to saying, I can't take it in here anymore, I'm just going to fess up to something I didn't do and I'll get out of here?
I never really got that far, to be honest with you, only because I know in my situation, I attended a few parole hearings, and at these parole hearings, you are made to either take remorse for the crime or show some form of responsibility. And I just couldn't find myself to do any of that stuff, because to me, that would be an admission of guilt. And I wasn't going to do that. So I really never came close to any, confessing to this crime and saying I did it. Although there were difficult moments in prison that I decided to, just sort of fight it out and see where it goes. And it went in a place where I eventually really believed it would go, and that's freedom.
When you finally got out, what kind of support is in place for an innocent man, not an ex-con, but an innocent man who gets out of jail and now has to basically fend for himself in the world?
Unfortunately, in New York State, and it's probably like this in other states across the U.S., there are no social services, there are no programs for people like myself and innocent people who have gotten exonerated from prison. So fortunately for me, I had a really good support system with Ken and many, many others who sort of guided me through some of the transition that I was going to need.
But it's interesting, ex-cons who have been found guilty and who have done their time, there are programs in place for them.
That is absolutely correct. So a person who's actually paroled, for example, will receive social services, whether it's medication, Medicaid, Social Security, and those kind of drug programs, whatever programs that particular person may or may need, that will be available for them.
How does that make any sense at all?
I don't understand it.
I mean, do they assume that, well, we'll pay you off, we'll give you compensation, therefore you're fine, we don't need to do anything else? I mean, this guy had never seen a cell phone before when he got out of jail. He came into a world that was so utterly different from the one he went in.
Well, they gave him $40 and said goodbye, and you didn't know, or he didn't know, when the compensation was coming. It can be years down the line. The one nice thing was that the people who supported David, especially from the movie, David and me, gave a substantial amount of money for a fund that it would be a bridge between the time he got out and when he got compensation, and it actually worked.
But I bet you'd rather have the 29 years back.
I certainly would. I certainly would. And I often say that not any amount of money would sort of replace what I had to endure during my time in prison. For just the mere fact that I lost my dad while I was incarcerated and several other family members, and I just simply didn't really get an opportunity to live, if so to speak. So there's nothing that can replace the liberty to kind of walk around and do exactly what you want to do without, having to be, somewhat demanded that you do certain things. So
Do they give you the money right up front, all in one fell swoop?
Yeah, they actually do. They actually do. But for me, just being smart about it, and again, it also goes back to the support system that I had. I was able to sort of take the money and do some really positive things with it, just to make sure that I had a certain money that I could sort of rely on whenever I needed it.
Well, this is what I want to understand, David,
Sure.
because at the time you went to jail, I'm going to guess that you hadn't had too many lessons in how to budget properly, or how to pay a hydro bill, or how to do, any of the things that everybody takes for granted in life. How have you learned how to do all that?
Well, I haven't learned, per se, how to do it. So in some ways, and this is probably interesting, because sometimes it comes down to a matter of trusting the people that you have hired to sort of work for you or work with you. And that's sort of what I did. But at the same time, I just feel like I'm learning on the fly in terms of investments, what to invest in, what not to invest in, how to budget money, when to spend money, what to spend money on, and that sort of thing. So from that standpoint, I think I'm learning. But at the same time, there's also a lot of room for improvement, which I'm no doubt going to be interested in, because I plan to do some certain things going forward with my life that's going to entail that I continue to budget my money correctly with family and that sort of thing. So that's also important to me.
So you've still got a support system in place that makes sure that that money will last you for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Are you working now?
Yes, I am.
What are you doing?
I work for the Manhattan Legal Aid Society, so I work with the Juvenile Rights Division. I work with the support staff there. So what I do is I do a lot of data work, a lot of paperwork around, children, juveniles, for example, and children who's in foster care and children who's been neglected and that sort of thing. So what I do also is I prepare paperwork for the attorneys in the case, so that when they go to court, they'll have the proper and necessary information in front of them to properly defend the client, if need be. Yes.
You have somebody special in your life?
I absolutely do.
Who's that?
Her name is Quinn Naomi McCallum. She was born May 2nd. 2016, and that's one of the best things that ever happened to me.
You are a father now.
I am.
Can you imagine that?
I can now, yes, but and I was asked this a long time ago about the expectation of being a father, and I said absolutely, I would love the opportunity to do that. And so I finally got that opportunity, and while there's been some interesting challenges of fatherhood, I'll never be anyone to complain about it, because she's a blessing in my life, and I'm certainly happy to have her.
Those interesting challenges, I can let you know, do not go away.
Yes, that's what I've been told.
Yes, you can rely on that taking place.
Yes.
How do you, his support system that's in place, what do you, he's out now, he's a free man, he's working, he's a father now. What do you see as your mission now that this has happened for David?
I'm his friend, and I'm there if he needs something. There's no mission anymore. He's out, and we have to go to another case, but David is helpful in that way too. We're equals. And in fact, when he was in prison, he wasn't some passive operative allowing everybody to get him out of prison. He was directing the show. I might have been the producer, and there were a lot of very strong supporting actors as well. But David was never passive in this.
The mother of your child,
Yes.
Are you two together?
Yes, we are.
How did you meet her?
Wow, so this is very interesting, and I'll try to be as brief as I can with this one. And this is also a connection to the support staff that I had. So I'm sitting in sitting in a diner in Brooklyn one morning, and I'm having a conversation with Ray Klonsky's wife. Her name is Robbie, and which of course is Ken's son. And I was having trouble getting dates when I first got out. But at the same time, I realized that I didn't want to just sort of run into any sort of relationship, and I kind of wanted to take sort of a methodical approach. So Robbie introduced me to this dating app called Tinder, and of course I didn't know what Tinder was. So when she told me the dating app, I wrote it down on a piece of paper to make a notation of it. So when I got home, I asked my sister, could she download the app into my phone at the time, and she did. And I got on Tinder, and I went on a couple of days that didn't necessarily work out. But I also I met Valerie on Tinder. We started dating for quite a while, and we got to know each other, and we as time went on, we got a bit more serious, and and then came Quinn. So yeah.
That's a brave woman to take a chance on somebody who's had the kind of background you've had. I mean, you're not typical. You are. Well, like I was going to say 1 in a million, but who knows even that? Maybe even more than that.
Yeah, yes. But I think what I did was, when I introduced myself to her, right before we started getting into any specifics about who we were and what we wanted in a relationship, I made it a point to let her know who I was and what had happened to me in my past, because I didn't want there to be no surprises when it came to my wrongful conviction. Because even though a person is exonerated from a case, there's still, doubts in people's minds about whether this person's actually innocent. So I wanted to assure her that, look, I'm here as I'm being totally honest with you about who I am and where I've been for a long time, and so she respected and appreciated that. And
I wonder how you did that, David, because it's an odd pickup line to say, "Hi, my name's David. I'm interested in you, and incidentally, I've been in jail for the last 29 years."
Right.
You don't maybe say it right away off the top, but
no, but it wasn't right away off the top. But gradually, as the conversation went on, and it was sort of going in a particular direction where we felt like it could even go even further, I just decided to come clean at that particular moment because, again, I didn't want there to be any sort of doubt about who I was, and I just wanted it to be out there because I would feel more comfortable about me letting that person know who I was and where I've been. And
did she know your story?
She did not. She picked up on my story as soon as I told her about me, and so she started Googling me and Googling the information about the case. And all
How did
that.
she react to getting that information?
She was perplexed, to say the least. But I understood, and she didn't immediately judge me on that. She, of course, wanted to know more about me and get to know me a little bit more, which I absolutely appreciated because in our society, which I've come to learn that everybody is not as forgiving as I guess maybe they should be, given the situation that I just experienced.
Your child, Quinn, is, what, a year and a half now?
Yes, she is.
A year and a half old. At what point do you tell her about you? I mean, have you thought about when you're going to tell her your story?
No, I have not, actually.
I mean, it's not going to be soon, obviously,
No,
but,
it's not.
but at some point, you may have to visit this issue.
I will. I may have to, and I certainly will revisit it or visit this issue with her, and I'll just simply be honest with her. I'll be honest with her the same way I've been honest with Ken and all the individuals who came into my life. I'll just simply let her know that what happened to Daddy was unfortunate. It could have been avoided. Daddy was not the person that they said Daddy was. I'll put it in those terms where she can, properly understand it. But I think it's important, as you would say, to let her know what had happened to me, because who knows? Look, wrongful convictions unfortunately happen all the time, and it can happen to anyone at any given moment. And I think it's important for her, as she gets older, to understand that too, because just like men are wrongfully convicted, so are women. So,
In your view,
yes.
Ken, how's he doing?
A lot better than we had thought. I don't know what the average individual carries out of prison with him or her. I do know that David has his issues with autonomy. If you've been told what to do for 30 years, it's very hard to suddenly become self-sufficient and say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. He delays a lot of things, and I think there's a fear. The fear also comes from walking around a prison and not knowing what's going to happen to you from moment to moment. It's life and death struggles there. So we are very pleased that he's been able to keep a job and to ride the subways and to have a relationship much, much better than I thought would have been possible. So,
David, let's finish up on this. Your country right now, the United States, is going through some extraordinary things. I think that's probably the most diplomatic way of putting it. There are too many examples of black men being killed by cops. There are football players who are kneeling for the national anthem because they do not see a country that treats them, in spite of their wealth and privilege as well-paid football players. They don't see them being treated equally in the country. You have a president right now that a lot of people think is, I'll just leave it there, fill in the blanks. Do you find it difficult right now to be loyal to the idea of the United States of America?
I don't, and I have to sort of harken back to my own experiences in dealing with people. So at a time when I needed people the most, people came into my life, and I appreciate that, because if these people didn't come into my life at a time when I needed them the most, I'm not sure where I'd be right now. So what I decided to do, and what I continue to do even now, given the political climate in the U.S., I decided to just rely on the faith of people. So there's many people out in the streets, so to speak, raising their voices, allowing their voices to be heard in a way that that's important. At some point, it can maybe provoke some sort of change. So my faith is in the people as opposed to the government itself, because as the government is constantly constructed, I'm very pessimistic about where the country may or may not be going. So I don't have a lot of faith in this particular government, because if they've been very clear with their agenda in terms of what they want to do as far as division, dividing the country, and I have to unfortunately say that they have done a pretty good job of doing that. So for me, my faith will continue to rely in the people, because at the end of the day, it's going to be people who ultimately get to where we need to be as a country, and as a people, and as a society. So.
We are always grateful for your visits here to us here in the capital city of the province of Ontario. Ken Klonsky, thank you for coming in. We remind people the book is called Freeing David McCallum, The Last Miracle of Rubin Hurricane Carter. And David, it's so good to see you again. Congratulations on parenthood.
Thank you very
The
much.
best is yet to come.
I absolutely agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.